You got all those books, the Bible, you've got the different Gospels and stuff that people are quite familiar with. Half the time, they didn't even need to read the subtitles. They could look at it and know what was going on.
What if the Jesus you were taught about was never the real one? Not a misunderstanding, but a deliberate replacement, carried out by powerful men. In 1947, a shepherd accidentally uncovered ancient scrolls the Western Church had spent centuries burying. But here is the shocking part. 8,000 miles away in the mountains of Ethiopia, monks had already been preserving those same texts in their complete and unedited form for over 1,000 years. An 81-book Bible containing a Jesus so different, so overwhelming, and so terrifying that powerful men decided centuries ago that putting it in your hands was too dangerous. Mel Gibson found him, and what he discovered will change everything you thought you knew. The world before Jesus, and why it needed him. Most people know the story of Noah's flood. God looked at the earth, saw how wicked it had become, and drowned everything, every living thing except Noah, his family, and the animals on the ark. The Western Bible gives you 4 verses in Genesis 6 to explain what broke the world so completely that God's only solution was to kill it all. Those 4 sentences say that beings called the sons of God came to the daughters of men, that they had children together, and that these children were mighty men of old. Then the very next verse says God saw the wickedness of man and decided to flood the earth. No names, no explanation of who these beings were or where they came from. No detail about what they actually did. Just 4 sentences, and then the rain comes. Most people read those verses and move on. The Ethiopian Bible does not move on. It gives you 11 detailed chapters about exactly what happened before that flood, who caused it, what they did to the earth, and what was left behind after the water receded. And what those chapters describe changes everything, because the world Jesus was born into was not simply a world that had drifted from God over centuries of human weakness. It was a world that had been deliberately and systematically destroyed by supernatural forces. And the most disturbing part is that those forces were still operating when Jesus arrived. Here's what those 11 chapters say. 200 angels, called the Watchers, gathered on the summit of Mount Hermon and swore an oath to each other. They made that oath before they acted because they knew what they were about to do was forbidden, and they needed a pact so none of them could back out. Their leader was named Semyaza. His second in command was named Azazel. They descended to earth and took human women as wives. What followed was not simply immoral, it was biological catastrophe. The offspring of those unions were the Nephilim, hybrid beings born from the union of angels and humans. And the Book of Enoch describes what these creatures did in detail that is deeply disturbing. They first consumed all the food and possessions of the people around them. When that ran out, they started eating the people themselves. They drank blood. They committed acts of violence against animals. Eventually, they turned on each other, tearing each other apart in acts of cannibalism, while the people around them had nowhere to run. The earth was soaked in blood long before a single drop of rain fell from the sky. But the physical destruction was only half of the catastrophe. The other half was knowledge. Azazel taught men to make swords, shields, knives, and armor. He handed humanity the technology of organized warfare at a moment when they were completely unprepared for what it would do to them. He also taught women the use of cosmetics and jewelry, not as beauty, but as seduction. The Book of Enoch directly blames this combination, weapons and calculated seduction used together, for the rapid spread of corruption and violence across the earth. Other watchers taught spellcasting, astrology, the reading of stars and clouds for hidden knowledge. One watcher named Penamue taught humanity the art of writing with ink and paper, and the text says he revealed to people the bitter and the sweet and the secrets of wisdom. Knowledge itself in this text was weaponized against the human race by the very beings who were supposed to be watching over it. Now here's where the story gets darker. God's response was not just the flood. Before the rain came, God commanded the archangels to do something that is never mentioned in the Western Bible. He ordered them to force the Nephilim to destroy each other. The giants, thousands of them, were made to turn on one another first. They tore each other apart with their bare hands. They slaughtered each other in waves, while the watchers, already chained underground by then, could hear it happening and could do absolutely nothing to stop it. Their children died screaming above them while they lay bound in the dark below. And when the last of the Nephilim had killed each other or were killed by the flood, God sealed the watchers in that underground darkness to wait in chains until the final day of judgment. But here is the detail that explains everything that comes after. The detail the Western Church found most impossible to accommodate. When the Nephilim died, their bodies were destroyed, but their spirits were not. According to the Book of Enoch, the disembodied spirits of the dead Nephilim had nowhere to go. They were not fully human, so they could not rest with human souls. They were not angels, so they could not return to heaven. They were condemned to wander the earth as something that had never existed before and was never supposed to exist at all. They caused sickness. They caused violence. They caused the kind of deep, spiritual corruption that no human being could trace back to a source. Every demon cast out in the Gospels, every unclean spirit that fled shrieking when Jesus commanded it, was in this framework a dead Nephilim. Jesus was not just healing sick people. He was personally dismantling, one person at a time, the damage the watchers had engineered before the flood. And then God told Noah something that is never mentioned in the Western Bible. Before the rain came, he warned Noah not only about the flood, but about the watchers imprisoned beneath the earth. He told Noah that the chains would hold, but he also told him that the spirits of the dead Nephilim would remain. That every generation born after the flood would be born into a world still haunted by what the watchers had done. That the flood cleaned the surface of the earth. It did not clean what lived underneath it or what wandered across it. This is the world the Ethiopian Bible says Jesus walked into. Not a world fallen through one man's mistake in a garden. A world that had been deliberately corrupted by 200 supernatural beings. The mission had a context. The incarnation had an enemy with a name and a history. And the Western Church spent 15 centuries making sure you never knew any of it. When Mel Gibson sat down with Joe Rogan and said his film about the resurrection had to start with the fall of the angels, most people thought he was being dramatic. He was not. He understood something the Western Sunday school tradition never explained. You cannot understand what the resurrection accomplishes until you understand what the watchers broke. Gibson said it directly. In order to really tell the story properly, you have to really start with the fall of the angels, which means you're in another place. You're in another realm. You need to go to hell. He was describing the only logical starting point for the story the Ethiopian Bible actually tells. But if the watchers created the problem, who exactly was the answer? The Western Church gave you a teacher, a healer, a sacrifice. The Ethiopian Bible describes something else entirely. He had a title. The Church erased it. That title was the Son of Man. The figure they erased. Jesus called himself the Son of Man more than 80 times in the 4 Gospels, more than any other title, more than Messiah, more than Son of God. And for 2,000 years, Western Christianity has largely treated it as a phrase of humility, a way of saying he was human, approachable, one of us. The Ethiopian Bible reveals something completely different. Those 3 words were not humility. They were the most terrifying claim a person could make. And the people who heard him say it in 1st century Judea understood exactly what he was claiming. The book of Enoch, chapters 37 through 71, introduces the Son of Man. Enoch sees a vision of 2 beings standing together in heaven. One is the eternal God himself. The other is a figure whose face is filled with grace, like one of the holy angels. An angel explains to Enoch who this second figure is. He did not appear at the moment of creation. He was not made when the world was made. He was named in the presence of God before the sun was created, Before the moon was created, before a single star existed, he was chosen, hidden in God's presence, and kept secret until the time came to reveal him. Now, here is what the title Son of Man actually means in this context, because it is not what most people assume. It does not mean a man born of a woman. In the book of Enoch, Son of Man is a specific title given to this hidden figure who stood beside God before the world existed. It means the one who would come in human form, the one who would enter the human world, carrying within him a divine authority so vast that every king, ruler, and fallen angel would one day answer to him. When Jesus called himself by that title, he was claiming to be the specific figure the book of Enoch described. This figure has 4 titles in the Ethiopian text. He is the Son of Man, he is the Chosen One, he is the Righteous One, he is the Anointed One. Every single one of those titles was later applied directly to Jesus Christ by early Christians who had read the book of Enoch and knew precisely what those words meant. When Jesus stood before his disciples and called himself the Son of Man, he was making the most overwhelming claim possible. He was saying, I am the one who was named before the stars existed. I am the judge. And that word judge is where this gets truly interesting, because the Son of Man in the Ethiopian text does not primarily teach or heal or forgive. He judges. Chapter 62 of the book of Enoch describes the most powerful kings and rulers who ever lived being dragged before this figure. They beg for mercy. Their faces go slack. The text says shame floods their faces and darkness fills their eyes. They receive nothing. They are cast into the furnace. This is not a pastoral figure. This is an authority before whom every earthly power simply collapses, and his reach goes further than humanity. The Son of Man in the book of Enoch comes specifically to judge the Watchers, the same 200 fallen angels who corrupted the earth before Noah's flood, the archangels. His angels Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Phanuel physically seize the imprisoned fallen angels and hurl them into fire. The Son of Man presides over that sentence. He is the answer the Watchers never saw coming, the one whose name had been hidden since before they fell, precisely so they would not recognize the threat until it was too late. Now here is where the story takes a turn that made powerful men deeply uncomfortable. Remember who Enoch was? He was not an ordinary prophet who received visions and wrote them down. He was the man Genesis describes as someone who walked so closely with God that he never died. God simply took him directly into his presence, alive. That made Enoch, in the ancient Jewish and Ethiopian tradition, the ultimate witness, a man who had physically been to the other side and returned with a report. His words carried a weight that almost no other figure in Scripture could match. So when the book of Enoch reaches its final chapter, Chapter 71, and something extraordinary happens to Enoch himself, it carries enormous significance. Enoch is taken into the highest heaven, and God speaks to him directly. And what God says is this: "You are that Son of Man who was born for righteousness, and righteousness dwells on you." God tells Enoch that he himself is the Son of Man, the same figure Enoch had been seeing in visions throughout the entire book. This sent the early church councils into a quiet panic, and here is exactly why. The entire book had been building toward this hidden figure who existed before creation, who would judge the world, who would sentence the Watchers. And now at the end, the text identifies that figure as Enoch himself. If the Son of Man could be Enoch, then what did that mean for Jesus, who also called himself the Son of Man? Were they the same person? Was Enoch a preview of Jesus? Was Jesus the fulfillment of what Enoch represented? The Ethiopian church taught that Enoch was exactly that, a preview, a foreshadowing, a prophecy in human form of the figure who would one day be fully revealed as Jesus Christ. But for the Roman church, trying to draw clean, simple lines around who Jesus was and what made him unique, that kind of ambiguity was dangerous. It raised questions they did not want ordinary believers asking, so the text that contained it was violently removed. The book of Enoch also says something the Western tradition has completely lost, and it connects directly to one of the most famous moments in the Gospels. It says that after the final judgment, After the kings and rulers have been sentenced and the watchers have been thrown into fire, the Son of Man will sit down and eat with the righteous. He will eat with the people he came to save. Now think about that image. Centuries before Jesus gathered his disciples in an upper room in Jerusalem for the Last Supper, the book of Enoch had already described the Son of Man sitting at a table with the righteous. The Ethiopian monks who read their complete Bible saw an immediate and obvious connection. The Last Supper was not a new idea. It was the fulfillment of something that had been written down long before Jesus was born. The Western Bible, without the book of Enoch, has the Last Supper with no backstory and no larger meaning beyond that single night. The Ethiopian Bible has a figure who was always going to sit at that table, whose name was spoken before the first star existed, who had been moving toward that moment since before the world began. But knowing who the Son of Man was still left one enormous question unanswered. How did a being of that magnitude enter the human world without destroying it? The answer is, in the second text, the Ethiopian church preserved, that the Western church quietly erased. And what it describes is not a gentle nativity. It is a covert operation. The infiltration. There is a text that survives in its complete form only in the Ethiopian Bible. It is called the Ascension of Isaiah, and it was read by early Christians as sacred revelation. Every other version of this text, the Greek fragments, the Latin copies, the Slavonic manuscripts, is incomplete, edited, or summarized. Only the Ethiopian version, preserved in the ancient Ge'ez language, contains the full account of what the prophet Isaiah saw when he was taken on a journey through 7 levels of heaven. And what he witnessed in chapter 10 of that journey is one of the most extraordinary things ever written about Jesus Christ. Isaiah is standing in the 7th heaven, in the direct presence of God the Father, when he hears the Father speak to Christ. The command is specific and stunning. God tells Christ to descend through all 7 heavens, through the boundary between heaven and earth, all the way down to the physical world to be born as a human being. And then God adds an instruction that no Western Christian tradition has ever taught. He tells Christ to take on the appearance of the angels at every level he passes through, to look like them, to blend in completely, to be unrecognized. The text says it plainly. You will resemble the form of everyone in the 5 heavens. You will be careful to resemble the appearance of the angels of the firmament as well as the appearance of the angels in Sheol. None of the angels of that world will know that you are Lord with me of the 7 heavens. The most powerful being in existence was being sent into his own creation in disguise, moving level by level through 7 distinct realms, deliberately concealing his identity from every order of beings he passed through. By the time Christ reached the boundary between heaven and earth, even the lowest angels had no idea what had just moved through their realm. The enemy did not see him coming. Then Christ arrived on earth and was born of Mary. The Ethiopian version describes Mary being pregnant, and then suddenly the infant was simply there. No labor, no pain, no process. One moment Mary was with child, and the next the child was lying before her. The birth happened between one breath and the next, with no physical transition that either Mary or Joseph could account for. Then Joseph looked at the infant and saw something that stopped him completely. The text says the infant's face was radiating light. Joseph stood there looking at this infant and felt something he could not explain and could not shake, a combination of terror and overwhelming reverence. Mary felt the same thing. They both understood, without being told, that what was lying in front of them was not simply their child. Something was inside that infant that was far older and far larger than the body containing it. And that is the exact moment the angel of the Spirit intervened and commanded them to tell no one, because what they had just witnessed was part of the concealment operation that had begun in the 7th heaven. The angels of the lower realms had not recognized Christ on his way down. The people of Earth were not supposed to recognize him either. Not yet. But the most disturbing implication of this text is what it means for the crucifixion. The Ascension of Isaiah says that the ruler of this world, the prince of the fallen powers, reached out and had Christ crucified. And here's the reason the disguise mattered so completely. If Satan and the fallen powers had known who Christ actually was, they would never have touched him. They would never have demanded his execution, because what was waiting for them on the other side of that crucifixion was something they were completely unprepared for. So Christ had to look like an ordinary man, a traveling teacher from Galilee, someone the fallen powers felt confident enough to destroy. The Ascension of Isaiah also explains why Isaiah himself was murdered. In the text, the chief of all fallen powers, the same supernatural force that had been working against God's plan since the beginning, needed Isaiah silenced. Isaiah had seen the entire operation and written it down: the disguised descent, the birth, the crucifixion, the resurrection on the third day. He had exposed the whole strategy, including the part where the enemy gets completely destroyed by his own actions. That information could not be allowed to circulate freely. So that fallen power worked through a human being, King Manasseh, the king of Judah at the time, influencing and driving him to act. Manasseh had Isaiah arrested and executed by having him sawn in half with a wooden saw, slowly, because a dead man cannot warn anyone. Isaiah was murdered specifically to bury the secret of what was coming, and for 17 centuries, the text containing what he saw survived in Ethiopia alone, in rooms so remote that monks had to climb ropes attached to cliff faces just to reach them. Christ descended in disguise. He was born, lived, taught, and crucified without the enemy understanding what it had done. But the crucifixion was not the end of the operation. It was the beginning of the most explosive part, because after the cross, Christ did not simply wait in a tomb. According to the text the Western Church buried, he went somewhere. And what he did there was the most violent moment in cosmic history. 3 days in hell. The Western Christian tradition gives you 3 days between the crucifixion and the resurrection, and then largely skips over them. Most churches teach that Christ rested in death, that his body lay in the tomb, and that the miracle was the resurrection on Sunday morning. The Easter sermon focuses on the empty tomb. Very few traditions stop to ask what happened in between. The Ethiopian texts do not skip those 3 days. They describe them in detail. The mainstream Bible touches this subject in exactly 2 places. The first is in the letter of 1 Peter, which says Christ went and proclaimed something to the spirits in prison after his death. The second is in the letter to the Ephesians, which says Christ descended into the lower regions of the earth. 2 brief references. No explanation of what those spirits were, where that prison was, or what Christ proclaimed when he got there. The Western Church left those questions unanswered for centuries. The Ethiopian tradition answers them directly. The Ascension of Isaiah describes what happened when Christ entered Sheol, the realm of the dead. He had spent his entire earthly mission concealing his glory. In Sheol, he stopped hiding. The text describes the full light of Christ flooding the realm of the dead. The angel of death, the being who had held every human soul that ever died since Adam, came face to face with the light of the Son of Man. The text does not say there was a negotiation. It says the angel of death was plundered, destroyed, stripped of his power by a force he had never encountered and did not recognize. The Gospel of Nicodemus describes what happened at the gates, and it reads like the opening of a war. Satan and Hades are in the middle of a conversation when a sound like rolling thunder hits the walls from outside. A voice comes through, "Lift up your gates, O rulers. The King of Glory shall come in." Hades calls back, "Who is this King of Glory?" The answer, "The Lord, strong and mighty. The Lord, mighty in battle." Hades orders Satan outside to stop him. Satan leaves. Hades screams at every demon to seal the brass gates, lock the iron bars, and hold the line. Then the gates explode, not opened, shattered. The brass came apart, the iron bars snapped, and every soul chained in that place since the time of Adam poured out. Then Jesus, the King of Glory, walked in as a man, and every dark place in Hades lit up instantly. Hades screamed, "We have been conquered. Woe to us." Then Hades turned on Satan with a fury the text describes across multiple pages. "You brought me an innocent man," he said. "You crucified him, dragged him here, and brought the source of life directly into the kingdom of death. You have lost me every soul I was holding. You will now stay here in their place." Satan had engineered the arrest, driven the trial, and executed the crucifixion with total confidence. Standing in the wreckage of the gates he had ordered sealed, he finally understood that every single move he had made to destroy Jesus had been the mechanism of his own destruction. He had built the trap himself, stepped into it himself, and pulled it shut with his own hands. Now connect this back to what you learned in the first section. The spirits in prison that the letter of 1 Peter says Christ preached to. Scholars who have studied this passage alongside the Book of Enoch consistently identify these spirits as the imprisoned watchers, the 200 fallen angels who had been chained in darkness since before the flood. The prison Enoch described, a place with no sky above it and no earth below it, desolate and terrible, a place where 7 stars burned like mountains and the angels who had corrupted the earth sat bound in the dark. Christ descended to that prison. He entered it, and he proclaimed judgment to the beings who had broken the world before he was born. The ascension of Isaiah then describes Christ ascending back through the 7 heavens after the resurrection. And this is where the full weight of everything that came before finally lands. When Christ descended, every order of angels saw him pass through and recognized nothing unusual. He looked like one of them. On the way back up, after the resurrection, the disguise was gone. Every realm he passed through on the return journey saw him in his full, uncovered glory, and the text describes the powers of each heaven being forced to bow. This is the sequence that Mel Gibson described to Joe Rogan when he said his film goes from the fall of the angels to the death of the last apostle. This is what he meant when he told the National Catholic Register that telling the story properly meant going to another place, another realm. Industry sources confirmed the film includes battles between angels and demons in other realms. Gibson told Rogan plainly, "You need to go to hell, you need to go to Sheol." He was describing the actual content of texts that the Ethiopian church preserved for 17 centuries, while the Western church taught an Easter Sunday sermon about an empty tomb and never explained what filled the 3 days before it. The Western church had very specific reasons for keeping those 3 days empty. Understanding those reasons requires looking at the men who made the decision, the empire that gave them the power to make it, and what they understood they were taking away. How the church erased a Jesus. In the year 312 CE, a Roman emperor named Constantine converted to Christianity. Before that moment, Christianity was a scattered network of communities spread across the empire, each with its own traditions, its own sacred texts, and its own understanding of who Jesus was. Some communities read the Book of Enoch as scripture. Some used texts that described the descent through 7 heavens. Some followed a 364-day calendar built on astronomical knowledge preserved in the Enoch tradition. Nobody agreed on a single canon because nobody had the power to enforce one. Persecution had kept Christianity decentralized by necessity. The moment Constantine converted, that changed. And it changed everything. An empire needs unity. A religion that supports an empire needs unity even more. You cannot run a centralized political structure on a religion where half your communities read one set of scriptures and the other half read a completely different set. You need everyone reading the same texts, believing the same creeds, answering to the same bishops. So councils were called, meetings were held, and the question of which books belonged in the Bible stopped being a theological question and became a political one. The Book of Enoch had 3 specific problems that made it a target. The first was authorship. The text claims to be written by Enoch, the man who walked with God in the time before Noah's flood. But the councils could not verify this. The Dead Sea Scrolls that would eventually confirm the text's ancient origins would not be discovered for another 1,600 years. Without that confirmation, the councils argued that a book written under a false name could not be trusted as scripture. This sounds like a reasonable scholarly position. It was actually a convenient one. Pseudonymous authorship was common in ancient literature, and the councils applied this argument selectively to books they wanted removed. The second problem was the Son of Man theology. The 4th century was consumed by a vicious debate over the nature of Christ, known as the Arian controversy. At its core, the question was whether Christ was fully divine and equal to God the Father, or a lesser being who had been created by God. The Son of Man in the book of Enoch, who existed before creation with his name spoken before the stars were made, cut uncomfortably close to this debate in ways the councils could not easily resolve. Rather than work through the complexity, they removed the text that contained it. Clean doctrine required a clean canon. The third problem was the most honest one, and the councils never stated it directly. The book of Enoch, the Ascension of Isaiah, and texts like them emphasized personal mystical experience, visions, heavenly journeys, direct encounters with angels and divine beings, individual revelation. A Christianity built around direct personal encounter with God does not need bishops to mediate that encounter. It does not need councils to define which experiences are valid. It does not need an emperor's endorsement to function. Institutional Christianity had everything to lose from a theology that told ordinary people they could encounter the divine without institutional permission. In 363 CE, at the Council of Laodicea, the Book of Enoch was formally excluded from the canon. In 367 CE, the bishop Athanasius wrote his influential letter listing the 27 books of the New Testament that would become standard. The Book of Enoch was not on it. Neither was the Ascension of Isaiah. They were labeled apocryphal, a word that technically means hidden away, but in practice meant not for public consumption, not quite heretical enough to be burned, just quietly removed from the lectern, from the library, from the hands of ordinary believers. Augustine of Hippo, one of the most powerful theological voices in Western Christianity, addressed the Book of Enoch directly in his book, The City of God. He acknowledged it was ancient. He acknowledged it was quoted by New Testament writers. And then he argued, hence deis animi, that its very antiquity was the problem, that a text so old could not have its authenticity verified, and therefore should be set aside. It was a circular argument. The age that made the text credible was used as the reason to dismiss it, and it worked for 1,500 years. The Ethiopian church was not at any of those councils. Ethiopian bishops were not in the room at Nicaea, at Laodicea, at Chalcedon. They never received Athanasius's letter. They had been Christians since the 4th century, when their king converted, making Ethiopia one of the oldest Christian nations on earth. When Islamic expansion swept across North Africa in the 7th century, Ethiopia was cut off from the Mediterranean world entirely. And in that isolation, the texts survived. Not in Greek, not in Latin, in Ge'ez, an ancient liturgical language that no Western scholar could read until the 19th century. The full scale of what had been buried only became clear on a single afternoon in 1947, when a teenager threw a rock into a cave near the Dead Sea and heard pottery shatter. What came out of those caves included 11 Aramaic manuscripts of the Book of Enoch, carbon dated to the 2nd and 3rd centuries before Christ. For the first time, the Western academic and religious world was forced to confront something they had spent 15 centuries dismissing. The Ethiopian church had been preserving and reading this exact text as sacred scripture for over 1,000 years. They had been right the entire time. The Dead Sea Scrolls did not tell the Ethiopian monks anything they did not already know. What the scrolls did was take away every argument the Western church had used to discredit them. You cannot call a text a medieval forgery when archaeology just proved it was being copied 300 years before Christ was born. You cannot call it apocryphal folklore, when it is sitting in a cave in fragments older than the New Testament itself. The church had spent 1,500 years explaining why these texts should be ignored. A teenager throwing a rock into a cave dismantled every single one of those arguments in one afternoon. The Return. In August 2025, Lionsgate announced the release dates. Part 1 of The Resurrection of the Christ will open on Good Friday, March 26, 2027. Part 2 will follow exactly 40 days later on Ascension Day, May 6, 2027. The combined budget is $200 million. Principal photography began on October 6, 2025 at Cinecittà Studios in Rome, the same legendary facility where the great biblical epics of the 20th century were filmed. Additional shooting is taking place in Gravina, in Puglia, Matera, and Genosa across southern Italy. Lionsgate is distributing. The film is being described by industry insiders as one of the most ambitious religious productions ever attempted. Deadline confirmed the scope of what Gibson is building. The film includes battles between angels and demons in other realms. It moves from the fall of the angels to the death of the last apostle. It is not a chronological retelling of familiar gospel scenes, and took 7 years for Gibson to write it. The original Passion of the Christ earned $612 million on a $30 million budget. It held the record as the highest-grossing R-rated film in American box office history for nearly 20 years. If the sequel generates even a fraction of that cultural impact, hundreds of millions of people will sit in dark theaters and watch a version of Christ that the Western Church spent 15 centuries making sure they never encountered. The cosmic Son of Man, who existed before creation, the figure who descended through 7 heavens in disguise, the being who walked into hell and broke its gates from the inside. That version of Jesus, on screens across the world. There is a question underneath all of this that is very difficult to sit with. If this vision of Christ could be so completely buried that billions of people lived their entire lives without knowing it existed, what else has been edited? The councils made their decisions under political pressure, with real consequences for real communities. The Ethiopian monks made a different decision. They simply kept copying. They sat in rooms lit by oil lamps, grinding ink by hand, ruining their eyesight, bending their spines, shaping every letter of the ancient Ge'ez script with a precision that cost them their health. They did not do this because they thought they were preserving forbidden literature. They did it because they believed, just as their fathers and their grandfathers had believed, that they were protecting the complete Word of God. They never knew their texts would be rediscovered, translated, and studied by scholars across the world. They just copied, they prayed, and they trusted that what they were protecting was worth more than their comfort, their health, and their lives. For 17 centuries, they were right. The vision they preserved is finally coming back. And when you sit in that dark theater in 2027 and watch Jesus move through dimensions that do not obey the laws of time or space, remember what you are actually watching. It is not Hollywood fantasy. It is not Mel Gibson's invention. It is nearly 2,000 years old. It was buried by councils, hidden in a language no one could read, preserved by men whose names history never recorded. And it is older, darker, and far more powerful than anything the church ever wanted you to see.